new type of drug is giving doctors more options for treating cancer. Today, we're meeting the very first patient in the U.S. to receive this newly approved cancer drug. We'll also hear why his doctors jumped at the chance to use it. Good morning. I'm Jessica Lovell, and welcome to the Morning Medical Update. After spending nearly 10 years in remission, Robert Norris learned that he had cancer yet again. The 83-year-old has follicular lymphoma. He started chemo in September, but it wasn't enough. In the past, doctors would have no other options. But today, he's getting what's called a bispecific antibody. The drug's name is quite hard to pronounce, so we're going to let the doctors take a shot at saying that here in just a few moments. But it's a man-made protein that can grab onto two different things at once. And for Robert, it's bringing cancer cells closer to his immune cells. Robert is joining us virtually today. Robert, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good to see you. We're so glad that you're joining us today. Here in studio with us are joined by two medical oncologists from the University of Kansas Cancer Center. We've got Dr. Mark Hoffman. He's the medical director of the Lymphoma and Myeloma program. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Good to have you. And of course, Nasheen Ahmed is the assistant director of cellular therapeutics at the Cancer Center. Dr. Ahmed, good to have you as well.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Both doctors who took part in Robert's care. And we want to know more about this type of drug, a bispecific antibody. I have not heard of that. I'm sure I'm not the only one. So Dr. Hoffman, just what is it and what is so exciting about them?
So we've had antibodies around for literally years. So before this was known as sera, so you'll often hear old studies actually from the 1800s looking at sera that specifically would fight specific types of infections. So these antibodies have been known for literally centuries at this point, and we realized they have extreme specificity to latch on to specific areas, and so they started getting capitalized for the use on cancer therapeutics in the early to mid-90s. And so this is a new concept of drugs where the drug not only binds to the cancer cell but also binds to the immune cell. And that's the main difference in this. We've actually had a couple of bispecifics around for a while, but the toxicities or side effects of the drugs and also the various patient populations limited their use somewhat. This is the first drug that has been FDA approved specifically for lymphoma and not for acute lymphoblastic leukemia.
And that's very exciting for you and your patients like Robert. So Dr. Ahmed, so how new are these?
Yeah, so this particular drug, which was mosunetuzumab, which was, I know, hard to pronounce. But,
thank you, though.
Yeah, so it was FDA approved like late 2022. So we just around the time when Mr. Norris, like Robert, was going through this cancer journey where we thought he would be a good candidate, and it just got approved at that time in December. So and he was one of the first people in the U.S. to receive this. So as Dr. Hoffman described, these drugs work by, making the immune system fight against the cancer. So it's not a traditional chemotherapy. The toxicities are different. It's sort of like an evolution of the class of immunotherapies that have been developing over the years, with others being like CAR T-cell therapies and other therapies.
That's what my next question was. How did you know that this was the right treatment over something like CAR T?
A very interesting question. So initially, when we first met, the thought was that Mr. Norris would be a candidate for CAR T therapy because that was the only available option after chemotherapy. The chemotherapy hadn't worked as well. There were side effects. The disease wasn't responding as well. So then we had to switch gears to the cellular therapies, immunotherapies. So CAR T was first given consideration, but then we had to weigh in. Now, when we had the option of mosunetuzumab, weigh in on what are the side effects of each, what would be the best to treat the cancer and to probably minimize toxicities. So after heavily discussing with other team members, the thought was that we should probably try something that may be a little gentle and may still get the work done, which is mosunetuzumab.
So, Dr. Hoffman, what was it like when you first met Robert? What do you remember about him as a patient?
Pancakes.
Pancakes, I know, that's the word.
Yeah, Robert liked pancakes. I mean, he rolled in sick as snot. He didn't really understand it at the time, but he was very ill. He had significant progression of his lymphoma, and he came in hot and needed treatment urgently. So we ended up giving him some chemotherapy. He had several cycles. He actually responded quite nicely to the treatments. The problem was he began to develop some progressive toxicities, and CAR T cells are wonderful. We've had a very robust CAR T program here. We've participated in the development of all of the CAR T constructs that are currently commercially available, but there are substantial toxicities, both short and long-term, associated with CAR T cells, and we felt that Robert was not in a position to be able to handle that after he developed some of these infectious complications. So these bispecific antibodies, not all of them are built the same way, and this particular one just happens to have a very, very favorable toxicity profile, meaning that the vast majority of people are just like him. They just don't get sick, right? They go through a couple doses, and you might have a couple side effects with some of the initial doses, but after you get through it, it's sort of like giving him water. And so he shows up, gets his infusion, rolls back home, and he's inconvenienced by the drive over here and the drive back home, but I mean, the therapy itself is just not a particularly problematic one.
But he came in really sick. How long did it take for you to kind of assess him and then make sure that he could get that medication quickly?
Well, I had the benefit of the fact that he had been worked up by some of our colleagues in Topeka. So when he came over, I was actually one of the old fellows that I helped to train, who currently is working over there. Osama Diab had got him diagnosed and sort of figured out what was going on. So he came to me reasonably well packaged, which is always a pleasure compared to somebody when they come in off the rails and you don't know what's going on. So we sort of knew what we needed to do, and I talked to Osama about him. I said, I think he needs to do this. He said, I agree, and so we sort of moved forward. In terms of drug acquisition, we've had a very robust relationship with Genentech, who's the manufacturer of this drug, for many years, and we participated in the early phase clinical trials of this drug. So we've been developing mosunetuzumab, and by the way, you're going to have to say it 5 times fast by the end. Say it again. Mosunetuzumab.
Mosunetuzumab? Mosunetuzumab.
There you go.
Good.
Use your schwas, right? It's just, there's a lot of uhs, right? So all those upside down e's finally get in, right? You need lots of schwas. Anyhow, the point being that we've participated in the development of this drug for many, many years, and some of the very first patients that were ever dosed with it in the world were treated here. I actually just did the edits on a manuscript that's going to be published relatively shortly, looking at mosunetuzumab with a chemotherapy combination. We're looking at some randomized studies with it, and so we've had a robust relationship with Genentech for a long time. Mitch DiRosario, and I'll give Mitch a shout out here. I'll probably have to send this video to him so he can be excited and go get yet another promotion. He got a promotion earlier. But Mitch is our medical science liaison, and Nosheen and I have an investigator-initiated study with Mitch. And so it was relatively straightforward to say, hey, Mitch, this drug is approved. Can we give it? We have a candidate. We need to get it, and we need it yesterday. And so it has never been a problem. Genentech has always been a pleasure to work with and help provide us with drug on an expedited basis when we need it.
That's a really good way of putting it. It's a word that I've got to start pronouncing more because it's now here and a part of our treatment plan. So that's really, really good news. Robert, I know you're still dealing with cancer, but we just want to know how you're feeling today.
Yeah, I've been out working now, working on my tomato plants and everything, and I've lost a little strength in my from my knees down, so if I get down on the ground, I have to work pretty hard to get back up. But outside of that,
we all do.
Right. I don't know. You want to know any more things that's really about?
Well, your daughter gave us some photos of you mowing the yard and working outside, as you just mentioned. It's good to see you back out in the sunshine, doing what you love. What have you loved about feeling better and doing the things that you've been wanting to do?
Well, truthfully, I've never really been what I thought was sick. I've always felt good, and I was really astonished when they told me I had cancer, except for back in 2004 when I took my lymph node underneath my jaws, and then it proved positive. And outside of that, I was doing everything any person would really want to do. I was working down to KU, and I was doing sports stuff down there and everything. And so that part I feel pretty good about.
That's good. So you weren't letting it slow you down. Dr. Hoffman, how is this medication administered?
So currently it's administered intravenously. So it's administered as an IV infusion, and it infuses over anywhere between 30 and 90 minutes depending on which dose and how strong it is. The future of the drug is probably going to be subcutaneous. So we're actually participating in a large international clinical trial right now looking at what's called subcutaneous, which means just under the skin. So it's a little bit easier to administer. Side effect profile is a little bit better. The drug requires a little bit of a ramp-up schedule to the dosing, and the subcutaneous administration allows you to get to full dose a little bit faster. So that has been really nice. One of our other physicians here, Dr. Ong Tun, is the principal investigator on that study, and we've been one of the top 3 enrolling sites in the world. So we've given a lot of mosunetuzumab and enjoyed it, and given plenty of it to folks like Robert as standard of care, but also plenty of it on clinical trial. And so it's been a real pleasure to watch the development of this drug from novel thought to dose finding, dose escalation, figuring out how to give it, understanding the toxicity burden, understanding how to manage those toxicities, and now watching the drug get approved where it can be used in much broader circulation throughout the world.
And now you're sitting right here, center chair, talking about your patients doing well.
Well, you stuck me in the center chair. I could so I, you know.
That's where you belong. Okay, so Dr. Ahmed, tell us how often you see Robert. What is his care currently, and what will it be continuing?
Yep. So at present now, Robert's like into this treatment. I think he's gotten a couple of cycles of it. So we're seeing him. Our team is seeing him every 3 weeks when he comes for the treatment. And I collaborate with the team at Topeka if there's any labs, if there's anything that needs to be dealt with over there. The main things that we look out for with this drug, mosunetuzumab, and some of these side effects, yeah, Robert, you've had, and I'll explain that. It's cytokine release syndrome. So again, a mouthful, but it's basically where these cells can kind of kind of ramp up your immune system and cause a fever and other like low blood pressure or low oxygen levels. Typically with mosunetuzumab, these are mild, what we call grade 1, mild, and Robert did have that. He did have fever with a couple of these cycles, and we were able to, Dr. Hoffman and I kind of talked about this, how do we get this controlled, and we were able to manage that with just giving him some steroids at the time that we give the dose, on the day of the dose. I think other things that I watch for with the mosunetuzumab are similar to CAR-T, but just a much less risk of that with mosunetuzumab. Risk of neurotoxicity, right? Any confusion, anything going on. But we've not dealt with that with this drug in his case. And then also risk of infection. So we keep watching out. We just ask Robert to let us know if there's any fever, if there's anything going on. But so far, I think, from our medical standpoint, I mean, it's pretty much he comes for his treatments and that's it, every 3 weeks. The first cycle, the first round, the first month, it was every week because it's a ramp-up period, so you have to come every week.
He's a good patient.
He is a very good patient.
Very good patient. Dr. Hoffman, you are the director of the lymphoma program here at the health system. Explain why this type of specific program is so beneficial to patients.
I mean, I think that one of the benefits that you get from seeing a group of doctors that focus on only one set of diseases is that they not only understand how to treat garden variety diseases and how to use relatively novel treatments that have just been approved, but they can also offer you access to treatments like this. Like we've been giving mosunetuzumab for 6-7 years now. So I have patients that have been in remission much longer than Robert has who've received this drug. And so you have access to novel therapies, and you have access to a group of people that really think about where's the future of treatment headed, and how do we do the 2 big pieces of oncology, which is how do we increase our cure fraction and how do we minimize the toxicities of our treatment, right? We want to beat people up less and we want to cure them more. And so to the extent that we can meet both of those objectives, that's what we're really trying to do here. And you have to have a group of people that are specialized and are focused on one set of diseases. It's way too much to try and treat everything and also participate in novel drug development and some of the trials that are going on.
You don't want a jack of all trades when dealing with your healthcare.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, and look, the folks that are out there that are doing general oncology are some of the brightest and most impressive people I know. We always say that their job is harder than mine. They still have to treat all sorts of different diseases. The issue is that when it comes to access to specialized therapies and understanding how to treat unusual sets of circumstances, they understandably have not seen nearly the volume that we have.
But what's so great about them is they know where to send folks, and
Yes.
they make sure that they have access to those specialized programs.
And that's the goal,
yours.
right? It's that we're always trying to make sure, does the patient need to be here? If they need to be here, they need to be treated here. Can they be treated at home? If they can be treated at home, they should be treated at home. And so we have a large network of providers throughout the state of Kansas, throughout western Missouri, and then extending into northwest Arkansas, some chunks in Nebraska. And those folks are all people that I work with closely. I think I had 3 or 4 calls already today about patients and what do I do? How do I manage this? Do you need to see them? And, you know, I think 3 of the calls I said, no, you can do this. This is what I would do. And they take off and I don't need to see the patient. And one of them, the guy needs to come down here and get evaluated.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to be able to make that judgment without necessarily requiring the patient to come down here before we tell them, hey, you didn't need to come.
Right.
Right. And so, you know, Robert would rather be out cutting his grass. He doesn't want to be here. So
Exactly. Eating pancakes and cutting his grass. That is right. Dr. Ahmed, when you come on the program, you always want to make sure we leave time to talk about the importance of clinical trials. I want to give you a moment to share what is exciting you right now. What do you want folks to know?
Thanks. Yeah. So again, none of this would be possible without clinical trials, right? So we in KU participate in all the, lead clinical trials for immune effector cell therapy, all the cellular therapy trials, which are CAR T trials, non-CAR T trials, as well as Dr. Hoffman has a whole slew of small molecules for lymphoma. I think the biggest message is that always be on the lookout for clinical trials. As a patient, ask your doctor. Ask your doctor if there's a novel therapy, CAR T trial, or immune or cell therapy trial. So, and that's how these drugs all came into being. Mosunetuzumab, as Dr. Hoffman said, we are participating in one of the largest trials of mosunetuzumab. The spectrum of lymphoma is changing to where more of these drugs are going to come out. So we need to participate in clinical trials, help patients understand how important they are. And then as a referring provider, we're here to answer any questions. If there's any question about clinical trial, always think about the clinical trials for patients.
And Dr. Hoffman, what excites you? Because I know we were talking earlier today just about the idea that trials are now using as a first line of defense. It's no longer, your last hope. It's the first line. Talk to us a little bit about what you know and what you're learning and where we're heading.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I have a day at work where I don't learn something, it's been my fault, not the day's fault. So we're participating now in a couple of studies that are our first in human studies looking at novel compounds, and it's been interesting. I work down at the CRC as well. I was actually down there this morning seeing 3 patients that are on this study, and the trial staff that are there, I was talking to them the other day, and they're accustomed to having patients come in for what are called phase 1 or very early first in human type studies, and a lot of the times those patients are not doing well, right? This is the kind of the last hope they have. They come in, they don't do so hot, and so they were sort of rolling in a little Eeyore. And then they get to see some of these lymphoma patients, and we've now treated 12 patients with this particular novel combination. We're the highest rolling site in the world right now on this particular study, and 11 of the 12 of them have achieved a complete remission. So there's only been one person that has had disease that was refractory, and that patient actually went on to get CAR T cell therapy and is now in remission, and so they have actually continued to benefit from novel therapies. But it is just an incredible opportunity to be able to participate in the drug development, to recruit the patients in, to get a group of people who are interested in pushing the envelope, patients that really want to know and want to benefit from these drugs that we now have available, and all of whom, when you ask them why they're doing it, they're saying so that the next guy that comes in a couple of years can benefit from me.
Yeah.
And that type of incredible altruism, I think, really comes out when you're faced with the gravity of a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, that's the legacy for sure, and we appreciate our participants so much. Robert, what has your experience been like here at the health system and the cancer center?
It's been real good. I kind of enjoy to come down there because I get such good treatment. But
he gets spoiled.
yeah. But
your wife said you're spoiled. Is that what she said? Are you spoiled, Robert?
Well, I don't get much around home, but I get kicked around home.
I doubt it. Well, we are happy to spoil you, my friend. We do have a few community questions I want to get to, and Tammy wants to know, how does a medication in a nutshell, what's your 30-second or less answer to that? How does it get FDA approval of medication?
Well, so it's a relatively complicated process.
Right.
So it starts with an idea, right? So somebody has an idea about how something might work and might help kill cancer cells. That gets tested in animals typically, and we get a sense of the toxicity profile, and then eventually it gets tested in humans. What occurs is, depending upon the nature of the disease, the rarity of the disease, the FDA will work with a company to figure out what level of evidence is required for approval. So in cancer care, there are two general sets of approval. One is a full approval, which is based upon generally a randomized study where you're comparing that particular drug to an accepted standard of care. The other is something called an accelerated approval, and the mosunetuzumab was done under an accelerated approval process where they had a type of a study called a phase 2 study, which is a non-randomized study, and it is looking at just straight efficacy, meaning how well does the drug work, number one, and then number two, what are the side effects? And if those line up and we look at that and we say, hey, for these patients that are in this particular subtype who have this type of disease, this drug looks a heck of a lot better than anything else we could be giving them. We're going to grant you accelerated FDA approval, and we're going to stipulate that you need to do a couple of additional trials, which are either phase 3 studies or something called a phase 4, which is a registration study, that will establish the long-term efficacy against a standard of care option. And so mosunetuzumab, I'm a member of a large group called Southwest Oncology Group, and we're in the midst of designing a study of mosunetuzumab versus a standard of care that will be a phase 3 frontline study in follicular lymphoma. So that is something that will help establish this drug and sort of figure out what its role is going to be. But that's the approval process in a nutshell. This accelerated approval process, to be honest with you, we really have the AIDS epidemic to thank for this. So understandably, folks in the early 90s who had HIV/AIDS, there were all these drugs available, and for those of you who have seen Dallas Buyers Club, if you haven't, go see it.
Great
if you
movie.
have,
great movie.
Right? That's part of this, and what they didn't really go into that in that movie was the activism that occurred behind the scenes to get the FDA to allow AZT and other early anti-nucleotide therapy to be admitted. And so they allowed companies to have accelerated approvals, and cancer is just as much of a horrific diagnosis as HIV is, and so as a consequence, that protocol got extended, and we're learning how to use it smarter. And so there are still occasionally drugs that are approved in an accelerated fashion where the approval ends up getting rescinded based upon subsequent data. Most of the time, these go through without a hitch, and the drug ends up hitting a home run. So some of the, I don't think much about sales, but the most successful drugs of the last 10 years in terms of sales, several of them are oral oncology drugs. Almost all of them were approved in an accelerated fashion prior to receiving full approval.
So Aaron wants to know, on the trials, Dr. Ahmed, is it a numbers game or is it more of a response game? Are you looking at the amount of people in these trials, or are you looking at the response that you're getting from a certain type of patient? Help people understand what you're looking at from these studies, or does it vary?
So for whenever there's a study, again, so it depends on what phase of study. Like, is it an early trial? Is it a, is it phase 2 or phase 3 trial? So the early trial is the one where, which Mark just described, where you're literally like studying the first in human, right? You're just looking for toxicity. So safety and toxicity, and then you look for efficacy. Then you're looking at, and usually those trials, the phase 1 trials, a smaller number of patients, because you really want to see what side effects are going on in humans. And then after that, as we get more familiar with the drug and it goes into phase 2 trials and later, then you're looking at efficacy. So how does this work as compared to, it can be in phase 2 a comparison group, or there may not be a comparison group, but how does it work in general? What are the survival numbers looking like? What are the progression-free survival numbers looking like? And ultimately, of course, the phase 3 randomized trials, in which you have two groups where the patient could either receive the new therapy or could receive the standard of care, and actually doing a head-to-head comparison and seeing how does that affect how does that affect survival and outcomes.
Robert, what is it like to be the first to try a medication, a drug that has made you feel better?
Well, I'm not a movie star, but yeah, I was really happy to do it for other people's findings and help them along, and it's helped me, you know.
Robert, we thank you.
I think they're on the right track.
Well, we thank you so much for just sharing your story. We can't educate without having our patients come forward and want to share their story. So thank you for being with us today. I want to get takeaways from our doctors. Dr. Ahmed, I want to start with you. What do you want folks to take away from this conversation?
So my biggest takeaway is that, you know, we have a lot of hope. There's these new drugs that are coming out. There's already CAR T cells that have been available. There's a lot of new options that are coming out, and I think that that things are going to get very interesting. There are going to be more options in lymphoma, which is very exciting. I want folks to keep thinking about clinical trials. All these novel therapies are going to be coming out earlier and earlier. So not after multiple relapses. So sometimes it's just patients going to their doctors and asking about clinical trials, and sometimes it's just, you know, the referring doctor just thinking about clinical trials rather than just standard of care, because that's where the field's headed, and this is where, you know, we hope to see a lot more progress in the coming years.
Dr. Hoffman, before I get your takeaway, just if somebody is watching and someone themselves or someone they love, someone they know has been diagnosed with lymphoma, what do they do? What is the first step? Who do they call? What questions should they be asking?
I mean, I think it's a great question. So lymphoma encompasses a wide variety of different diseases, and so I think that's the really critical piece. Is when somebody says they have a lymphoma, it's sort of like saying they own a car, right? I need to know, do you have like an F-150 dually that's bright green with pinstripes, or do you have a Ford Mustang, right? Like, what do you have? And I need very, very specific details. So most of the time, a lot of it's making sure that their pathology has been read by a group of people that have expertise in understanding how to sort through what a lymphoma diagnosis is. And so we have a whole group of people, and we talk all about that. And so nailing the diagnosis is the first step, and then figuring out what the management plan should be. One of the cool parts about this disease that I really like are there are some diseases where I tell a patient, they walk into the office and I'm like, all right, you're going to the hospital today and you're starting chemotherapy tomorrow. And that's what you need to do, and that's the only way that we're going to make sure that we have a good outcome. To you just got diagnosed with lymphoma, and now my job for the next half hour is to convince you that you don't need to do anything about it, and that the best move is to do nothing for as long as you possibly can. And those are very, very different conversations.
That's an interesting day.
So you can imagine that there's everything in between those. And so I think a lot of it has to do with figuring out how to right-size the treatment for the disease, right? What exactly do they have? What are their treatment options? What is the ideal thing to give them? What's the ideal thing for that particular patient, right? The ideal thing for somebody like Robert is probably different than someone like you. Your goals are different, where you are in your life is different, what other medical issues you have are different, and so we have to take all those things into account when we try and set up a treatment plan.
Thank you both for coming and just educating us, telling us where to go, what kind of questions to ask, and most importantly, just giving us hope. Thank you both. Growing old and tired, they don't have to go hand in hand. I'm Jessica Lovell. On the next Open Mics with Dr. Stites. Fatigue is common among older adults, and finding its cause is important. We explain the medical meaning of fatigue and when it's worth seeing a doctor.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcasts. Now everywhere podcasts are available.